Hello Kerbal, and welcome to another tutorial on going to Jool, but this time we're going to be landing on a moon. Okay, no, we're not going to land on Polber there, but we are going to land on one of the moons. Now, most of you would probably think that this moon, Lathe, would be the one perfectly to land on, because it has an atmosphere, an oxygen atmosphere that Kerbals could survive on. But no, I'm going to land on this moon, Vall. And the reason is, there's no atmosphere on this moon, so you can't use parachutes to land on it. So it's like landing on the moon. But also, it's an analog to Europa, which is a moon that orbits Jupiter. And there's a theory that there's underwater ice there. Also, I have never landed on, so this will be a first for me as well. Okay, what is the first thing we have to do? Well, plan, of course. Now, I've added this mod called Kerbal Alarm Clock, and on it you've got this transfer tool. So let's go ahead and change the origin from Kirby to Kerbin, and we want to go to Jool. Now, this will line up the planets for your launch window, and you see it's going to take 101 days from the time I'm starting to play this game. And if you check by model or by formula, they're both similar, so we could use either one. And I checked on the website that I've shown in the last Jool tutorial on how to get a probe to Jool, and it is about right. Now, I added 20 minutes margin there for launching, but I suggest if you're new to this, add an hour. That means it gives you a lot of time to get up there, a lot of time to make the maneuver node that is going to get you on the way to Jool. Now, don't worry about having to line up for the moon itself. We'll do that later on as we get to Jool. But right now, we have to build. And it's going to be a simple build. It's going to be a lander. I want to take Kerbals, so it's going to be a heck of a big rocket. Okay, first things first, you engineer a rocket in reverse. Yes, in reverse. So the last thing you do to the first thing you need to do. And the last thing is you need to re-enter the atmosphere Kerbin. So you can see I've added parachutes and the heat shield to re-enter the atmosphere. Now we're building the rocket that is going to return us to Kerbin. And you don't need too much. The rocket for return is actually quite small. And you need less delta V to get home than you do to get to Jool. Okay, so you can see I've added external tanks, and I've rotated them just to reduce the cross section, so we don't have to have a big airstream shell when we're launching. It also makes this design look unique, to my liking. Oh yeah, don't forget the landing gear, and don't forget to use the off position tool to get those landing gears in the right position if you're trying to copy this design. Okay, so now I'm going to add some solar panels. Do note that solar energy, when you get to Jool, drops off, so the efficiency of the solar cells do decrease as you get further from the sun. I was a bit unsure of what to add to the nose cone, so I've decided to add the drogue chute we can use for re-entering the atmosphere of Kerbin. Okay, once that is done, we now need to create a stage that is going to get us to Jool. So I've added the large Kerbodyne tank and the large Rhino Kerbodyne engine. That is sufficient to get us to Jool, get us into orbit, and, well, not get us to Jool, but get us into orbit around Jool and to the moon, because that takes quite a lot. Now we've added the fairing for the spacecraft. Don't forget to add struts in the middle if you can, but be careful, this design seemed a bit buggy while we were on our way to Jool, and we'll show that in the video. Now for the launch stage, and this will also serve as our transfer stage as well, once we finish building it. Okay, I've used two large Kerbodyne tanks, I've copied it, I'm going to put them on the outside. I found that just having those tanks though was not enough. We had to add extra tanks on the top to get the required delta V. Now, about around, 13,000 meters per second in total for this mission. I will probably leave you to decide on what fuel to use where, because it's probably a more efficient way. I have to warn you that I'm not an expert in astrophysics all the way on the most efficient way of getting to an orbit of a planet far away. And you see I've added extra fuel tanks on the outside, and that was for our launch stage. The outer rockets will detach during launch, the center rockets will then serve as our way of getting into orbit and getting our way towards Jool. Okay, don't forget to add the launch clamps. And before we launch, add some Separatrons, because those tanks I found during separation hit your center tanks and demolish the entire rocket. And I should have added a clip in here, but I didn't. Okay, now we're on the launch pad. It is time for us to use the alarm clock. We've still got 101 days to go, because building the rocket doesn't take long. I add an hour on there, just to make sure we have enough time. And now, through the magic of time acceleration and video editing, we can accelerate time, and the Kerbal alarm clock mod will stop the game, or at least put it in normal mode when the planets have aligned. So now it's all time for launch. If you want further details on how to launch and how to get an encounter with Jool and planning it all, visit my tutorial on how to get a probe to Jool. Because I go into a bit more detail at websites you can visit to get the time right, get the angles of the planets correct as we get into orbit. I'll let you figure out how to get into orbit. By the way, this design was quite stable in getting to orbit. Didn't have much wobble, didn't have much problems in control. Don't forget to add RCS to rotate the rocket though. It's very important. Okay, now get into Jool. First off, set Jool as your target. Zoom in on Kerbin. Make sure that you're in alignment with the direction Kerbin is traveling around the sun. Then add a maneuver about this angle. Don't worry to be exact, because we can adjust the position of the maneuver node. And just drag the prograde vector until you leave the sphere of influence. Now you want to zoom out and watch the orbit as it increases, as it gets ever closer to Jool. Okay, be careful, you want those close approach markers. Ooh, we got an encounter. Now you can fiddle with maneuver node to get the best effect. You can see by here I chose a different angle to look at the maneuver or our trajectory, and you can see we're not on the exact same angle as Jool. That's because the planet's angles or inclination is offset slightly. So I adjusted that, tried to adjust the prograde and the retrograde. But also don't forget, you can drag the maneuver node around as well. Now, as I said, I'm not an expert at this, and you can use tools like Precise Node or MechJeb to use precise node controls to get the perfect encounter. And you can see as well, the delta V required is about 2000. So burning the node now as we skip in the video, because these videos would take several hours if I'd done this mission in one go. And watch those explosions. Lovely when that happens. Okay, so we've got rid of the second stage, and now it's just for a full burn on the way to Jool. Now it's best to be in map mode. Someone told me off not being in map mode on the tutorial I'd done for a probe to Jool, and I think he was right, because the best way to make sure you get the maneuver you require or you burn correctly, being in map mode will help quite a lot. Because you can do things like this, you can kill your maneuver node and finish the burn off slightly, or try to get as close as possible. Now at this point, don't worry, because we're not going to get an encounter. You may lose your encounter for some reason, but you can do correction nodes, and this is the way NASA has done it, and it's always doing it. Now, creating a correction maneuver node further out from the planet as you're on the way can make it a bit easier, because all I used there was the prograde vector, and it's much easier than when you're closer to the planet, where the angle of your rocket on the course is slightly different. So as we leave the confines of our home planet, we can use the magic of the Kerbal alarm clock to get us on our maneuver node in time. And that is a very handy tool. Right by here, what I do is I kill the maneuver node, and because we're only pointing prograde, make sure you use the SAS computer to point prograde and then just burn slowly. Because it was only about a 3-second burn, and hey presto, we've got an encounter. Now, you don't have to be extremely precise. I'm trying to get a little closer, and I think I stopped there, yes. So now all you have to do is focus view in on Jool. I can see comparison not extremely close. And in fact, to get a good orbit, what you need to do is approach the planet as close as possible. That way you use the Orbital effect or the planet's gravity to pull you along to increase your efficiency of your burn. Now, I'm not going to go into the depth of the Orbital effect because I don't understand it 100% myself. And here I'm just checking where the radial patterns is. Sorry, I meant normal. So what I'm going to do is point the spacecraft to the normal vector. And skipping the video because it took a long time to maneuver. And we're going to burn and watch the angle of our approach to the planet. Yes, the further out you are, the more efficient your burns would be to affect your course on your way to the Jool system. Now what we're going to do is flatten the angle out to where most of the moons are. And that's because Vall is on that angle. And if we're not on that angle, do an inclination change while we're in orbit around Jool. It will be astronomical. Pardon the pun. Okay, so now we're on the correct angle. We now have to reduce the orbit to get close to the planet itself. Now, I have to note, they might be fine to use RCS rather than thrusters at this point. And you see, I used the thrusters and we overburned it. So what I do, I engage the RCS is on, and I use the N key, which thrusts backwards on the rocket, to reduce it. As you see, it's quite effective. And that's due to our distance from the planet. If we were much closer, that would take a lot more fuel to do so. Okay, now let's add a maneuver node to get ourselves into a high elliptical orbit. We seem to be a bit of an angle there on our approach. Just adjust that. Now, if we'd done that, orbit burn at the position where we were far out from the planet, that would have taken a couple of 1,000 meters per second. And that is what we want to reduce, the amount of fuel we use, because we have to get our Kerbals home safely. And through the magic of time acceleration and the maneuver node planner in a conjunction with the Kerbal alarm clock, we can fast forward time without any worry that we'll miss our burn. Okay, this is where things go haywire. So we maneuver ourselves to the correct position, do our burn, we run out of fuel, so we stage go to the next stage, and watch the rocket wobble. The Kraken strikes again. Everything flies apart, and it doesn't look like it there, but the rear tank and rocket has detached from the front of the rocket. So doing another test as we're further out of using a quick load. Handy tip, do quick saves and quick loads. Which shows the same problem, where everything detaches. Now I find out that the Airstream attachment is to blame. So what I do, I hyper edit another craft there with the Airstream and get the Kerbals in there. And back to the maneuver node. And reduce our orbit. Yes, it was a bit of cheating, but that was because there was a bug in the way the game was working. And there'll be another bug which is quite fun actually. I'm not sure it's on every copy of KSP, but you can experiment for yourself. Okay, so now I've set Vall as a target, and I created a maneuver node, moving it about to see if we can get a close approach. It's a handy tip to do. And then I'm using the plus orbit markers. Just right click on the maneuver node and click the plus when it allows you to do so, until you get a close approach, and I do it when I get a correct angle. Yes, that looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do, get the maneuver node up, prograde. No, we're not getting much closer. I want to use as little fuel as possible at this point. No, we get a close approach encounter with lathe, but we don't want that. Retrograde does not seem to do it. Now, don't people forget to use the radial maneuver nodes or maneuver vectors. As you see, that works for us by here. Okay, now that we've got an encounter, focus on Vall. zoom in, and you can see our approach to the planet. Now, fiddling with the maneuver node, you can hover over one of the vectors and use your mouse wheel to adjust it slightly slowly. As you can see, it's doing big effects on it, but it's not going to the extreme where we're not going to get our encounter. Okay, so that looks about good, 86 kilometers. Now what we have to do is fast forward time. And do be careful, I was doing this in looking at the rocket, hoping to make some nice looking videos, by the way, but finding that we have a close encounter of the moon lathe. At this point I had one more orbit to go, but what I did, I burned on the maneuver node to lose the encounter with lathe, create another maneuver node, because we have one more orbit of Jool to do before we get our encounter, set everything back up as I showed you, and we get our close approach, and we complete the burn. Check and see if our orbit is correct. You can zoom in, focusing on a planet while you're doing the burn as well, or the moon in this case, sorry. And hey presto, I think that's good enough. Let's add a maneuver. This is the part where I was unsure. Now look at the amount of delta V it requires for us to get in this orbit of this moon. Now it could be because this moon has low gravity. We could do slingshots around other moons to get our orbit as close to Vall as possible, that way the maneuver node wouldn't take so much. But as I said, I'm no expert in orbital mechanics, so I can't voice a professional opinion by here. However, this does work as we stage again to try to get into orbit. There is enough fuel for this mission and for return. So that I can safely say this mission does work. Now at this point I recommend getting your orbit not extremely low, but low and circular, because it requires less fuel and you have less speed to kill as you're approaching the surface of the moon. Because if, like me, you're using the large Poodle engine, I think it's the Poodle engine, then the acceleration on that is slow compared to most of the other rockets. And you want to have to make sure that you're not going to hit the ground as you're coming down. Okay, so here we are, landing on an alien moon. Now I've landed on Lathe before, but I have not landed on Vall. And as Lathe has an atmosphere similar to that of Kerbal, you can bet it's going to be easy to use parachutes. Okay, first tip, when you get to 60,000 kilometers, burn until your velocity is down to 500 meters per second. At about 30 kilometers, start burning until your velocity is down to about 400. And we will continue this. Now we start burning, and I'm trying to look for some smooth landing area, because Vall does not appear to be smooth in many areas, even on the blue lower parts. So I'm trying to kill my velocity completely here, and we'll try and land on the smoothest area that we can find, so we're not on a slope. Okay, this is good. Make sure you keep the rocket pointing at the retrograde marker on the nav ball, and control your speed as you're coming down. At this point, you want to make sure you're coming straight down. You can see the retrograde marker is off center from the center of the nav ball. That means you're going sideways slightly. In this case, it's not that much because we're going at slow speed. But what you can do is angle your rocket or chase the retrograde marker to the center, depending on how you feel, how much distance you have from the surface. What you could do, if you're in worrying, kill your velocity completely and come down slowly. But make sure you don't hit the ground any faster than 7 meters per second, because I find any faster than that and you break your landing legs. So you don't want to follow the advice of a mission controller and break a leg. Anyway guys, we have landed on Vall. This is awesome. Actually, this is the first time I landed on Vall. It's a shame that's not in career mode. Now I'm showing you from the helmet of a Kerbal. And this is where things get weird. Okay, after exiting the camera of the Kerbal helmet, I experiment by changing the orbital camera to orbit. And yes, the Kerbal seemed to lie down. And this is mad. Yeah, I had to show you to this, guys. I know this is a tutorial video, but this has to be shown. Look at this, as Jebediah lies on his back and Bill and Bob slowly slides down the slopes while we're on the side of the planet. How is that possible? Yes, it is extremely strange and bewildering. But you can imagine that on Earth. If you're on the equator, you're really on the side of the planet, aren't you? And the South Pole is on the bottom. Ah, well, funny enough, gravity does not work that way, does it? But what gravity does do, it means that we have to launch. Okay, so when you're launching, launch the same as you do on Kirby in the easterly direction, but you don't have to do a slow gravity turn. Just at 45-degree angle, straight up. Make sure you burn to over the height of the mountains, as I had to make sure I did there, and get in range to orbit. Now we expelled the other tanks, or decoupled, and that's because the fuel had run out on them. They were there basically to hold the land legs and to hold the extra fuel. But we had about, was it 3,000 meters per second, I believe we had, for a return to Kerbin. Now, using the Kerbal alarm clock to plan a return to Kerbin, the formula says 6 days. I found out that's incorrect. When I checked the model, it says 393 days, which is a bit closer to the actual fact. But I had to use Alex Moon's transfer planner to make sure that we were going to use the right date to get our maneuver. So what I do instead, I use the Alex Moon's transfer window, add the date from the website into the Kerbal alarm clock to make sure we get the exact time. I switch over to the probe we have in orbit so we can do the extreme fast forward that we require, because if you're in a low orbit around the moon, the time acceleration goes to almost 1 times, at least at certain points. But switching back to the craft when there was 11 days left on the transfer window, because we have to change our orbit to get in orbit around Jool. As I said before, using the Albert effect or getting close to a planet is the best way to get the most efficient way of returning. So what I've done here is I've lined up Jool on the direction we're traveling, and I'm showing you here in which angle you need to take to reduce your orbit around the sun to get back to Kerbin. So we need to accelerate until we're at this point. And again, I switch back to the probe and then back to our spacecraft to accelerate time to get the right position. What we want to do is reduce our orbit around Jool, so we leave the sphere influence of the moon, as I'm showing you by here. Right. Point retrograde on the orbit of the moon and create a maneuver node about here at this angle. Use your prograde vector and you see we're reducing the orbit around Jool, and we're going to be using a similar effect to reduce our orbit around the sun by using Jool's gravity. Now I get about 500,000 kilometers away from Jool as the orbit height during the burn, and I find that was quite effective for our turn, because now if we add a maneuver node, and remember we've got about 10 days left on the clock before we can do our transfer burn, create a maneuver node and use the plus and minus if we can get it up. I have a quite difficulty using the plus and minus orbit until we get about 10 days on the node time. So that's 11 days, no, not less. That's 10 days. And you see the node on the bottom near the nav ball. It's got 9 days, 2 hours, 48 minutes. Now zoom out with the maneuver node open. Make sure that Kerbin set as a target. And oops, I clicked on some time accelerate somewhere. So yes, be careful where you put your mouse. If you need to use a maneuver node, make sure it's open before you zoom out. Now, as we do the prograde vector, you can see it reduces our orbit. And this is going to take under 1 kilometer of delta V. As I said, it using the effects of gravity to your benefit is absolutely awesome. So yes, use the planets to your benefit. And now it may take you a while to work out what angles and how to use moons and planets to your benefit, but doing so will save you a lot of fuel. Now you can see I didn't get an encounter, I got a close approach. And that's okay, because what we can do is maneuver node corrections. And you see I'm using the prograde, retrograde, changing the angle, try to get the angle correct, check the close approach, and hey presto, we eventually get it. It may take a bit of trouble getting the maneuver set up, but the further away from curbing you're able to do this, the more fuel you can save in doing so. Okay, so now that we've focused in on curbing again, we're going to do the similar things that we did to Jool and the moon. We're going to use the maneuver node, use the mouse wheel I advise, to first get close, and what we want to do is actually intercept curbing. And use the radial, not the radial, sorry, the normal and anti-normal, which is the up and down basically. Okay, so we're in line, and we want to hit curbing basically, or at least the edge of curbing. Now we'll do some adjustments as we get closer to curbing, but for the moment, let's hit the planet to make sure we don't go screaming past and missing home completely. Because there's one thing you do not want to do. Okay, so this is set up, the burn has been completed. I'm trying to create a maneuver node, but now and again, Kerbal Space Program has problems on letting you add a maneuver node. Now what I'm doing by here is trying to adjust the maneuver node so we get about 10 kilometers into the atmosphere. And in theory, that should be enough. I was guessing at this time in that to be enough. So after burning that maneuver node, we can now approach curbing. I haven't ejected the rocket engine yet, just in case we get into orbit. And we seem to hit the atmosphere, so now we can detach that and watch that rocket explode as it disintegrates within the atmosphere. Checking the ablator and keeping an eye on that heat gauge, which is just above the heat shield reading. Ooh, we're coming in hot, guys. From interplanetary space, we're traveling at over 3,000 meters per second. Extreme speeds. And we're experiencing extremely high G-forces, which the Kerbals only survive from their excessive snacking and their love of space. But now we have survived re-entry heating. So all you have to do is pop those chutes once they're not showing red. First off, this is the drogue chute. Make sure that's where we're going to land. We're landing near the crater that is on curbing. Right, the drogue chute is engaged. Well guys, that was a successful mission. So if you like this video, hit that like button. Also subscribe if you want to see more, because more will be coming at some point when I have time. All I can say now is, I'm Orbital. Trust me, I'm an engineer who's been to Val and back.